Welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
Hello and all right, guys. Hello and welcome to another Note to File podcast. The date is April 9th, 2025. My co-host, Denali, is not here today. Let's see. She says, quote, I have a day job. I can't be on your stupid podcast. Good luck, loser. And a picture of herself flipping me off. So shout out Denali. Otherwise, very happy to have our guest here today. Jim Kremidas. How's it going, Jim?
It's going good, Brad. I thought that message was meant for me, not you.
Yeah, well, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
But
yeah, doing great.
Good. Glad to have you. I know we had some exchanges on LinkedIn. Glad to get you on, talk a little bit about AMRC. But before that, start out like I do with every guest. Tell us a bit about yourself and sort of your journey through the clinical research space, if you will.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the members of AMRC do as well. My background, actually, oddly enough, I started off as an analytical chemist at the Upjohn company, which is now a portion of Pfizer, many years ago. I quite frankly found working in the lab kind of boring. Went off and did a bunch of other things. Had a kind of a career away from pharmaceuticals for several years, and then when it was time to get back involved, I talked to a friend of mine, and make a long story short, I got hired by Lilly, and I was with them for about 24 years. I started my career in sales and marketing and spent the first half of that 24 years doing various management roles within that function. And while I was there, I began to wonder why we weren't spending the money we had budgeted for research. Every year, it turned out we were coming short, and I started asking questions. Well, the long and short of it was, because it's a fee-for-service payment for phase 2 and phase 3 trials, and sites were not recruiting patients in a timely manner or as the way we had forecasted, we weren't spending the money we had forecasted. So I got involved with a Six Sigma project at Lilly, and we identified the fact that our poor forecasting, which, by the way, was something I did in the marketing side because I had marketing research for all our anti-infectives, that poor forecasting is really what led to all this waste. So we created a department called Global Enrollment Optimization, where we did the forecasting for enrollment rates using data instead of guessing. Two patients per site per month guess, that old thing. And we used statistical analysis to really more accurately hone in on when we would probably enroll trials. And on top of that, we also added using communication. So we were working with patient recruitment firms, and our department helped decide which was the most appropriate patient recruitment tool to use in order to get the trials to finish when we wanted them to. From there, I retired from Lilly, and then I went to what used to be Quintiles, now IQVIA, ran their patient recruitment group for about 5 years, went to another CRO for a couple of years, and then I did consulting. And it was interesting because I got to work with different vendors, suppliers, technology groups, a lot of patient recruitment groups because of my background. And ultimately was working at a phase 1 site for about a year, which was, again, very interesting for me. And then from there, I was hired by the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, ACRP, to be their executive director. And I did that for about 5 years. And then when I retired from there, I've been doing some part-time consulting, but AMRC was forming, and some of the people on the board were people who are on my board at ACRP. So they reached out to me to become the executive director of this group now.
Very nice. Yeah, I definitely, want to talk extensively about AMRC. I want to ask a little bit about, your background in patient recruitment. It's not lost on me. I go to getting out there a little more, going to conferences. We see a ton of patient recruitment vendors. So the problem's fixed, right?
No.
No.
No. I mean, it's funny because I talked to some of my old colleagues that were involved with this years and years ago. So, I mean, everybody knows Ken Getz. I was involved with Ken when he first created SysScript, and when he was, of course, doing CenterWatch and those things. But, we talked about this a lot. Another person, a good friend of mine, Beth Harper, was also very, very active in this arena. back in the, back around 2000 or so. And we kind of joke about it because we hear a lot of the same things now that people were talking about back then. What has improved dramatically is the awareness that this is something that's important. It used to be that you just threw the protocol over the fence to the site and said, okay, go recruit now, and now there's a lot more tools and resources available for sites to use, or for, in some cases, centralized campaigns make sense. And in some cases they don't. The interesting thing about communications and marketing, which is really what it is you need to understand who your audience is. You need to understand what is the best form of media to get a message in front of that audience. And it may not be media, it may be person to person, right? And then you need to figure out what the message is that they need to hear. So, who are they? How do you get to them? And what do they need to hear? And that varies from study to study. I used to say every study is a quote unquote product in and of itself, if you're using marketing and sales terms.
Sure.
So it's very complex, and consequently, we are seeing some successes. Some people are good at it.
Of course, yeah.
How to choose the right tools, but other times they just throw stuff at the wall, and it doesn't really help.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to. Do you feel? I mean, I feel like there's at least maybe I'm wrong, somewhat broad consensus that like recruitment is getting harder and harder.
Well, that's
do you get that impression, like as the years have passed, or?
Yeah, I do, and for a couple of reasons. One is a lot more emphasis on very tight inclusion-exclusion criteria. That has a lot to do with it. Protocols are becoming more complex. By the way, I should have mentioned this too. Not only am I doing the AMRC thing, I teach a master's level class at Wake Forest University too, in clinical research. And I have participated in a clinical trial myself in the past couple of years. And so it was really interesting to me, to be a patient in a trial after all these years of being in the industry.
Sure.
Ironically, it was very difficult for me to find a trial, which seems ridiculous because it's the industry that I've been in for so many years, but I'm telling you, it was really tough. And if I didn't have the contacts that I had in the industry, I probably would have never found the trial that I was in.
Yeah, I mean, obviously awareness still remains a big issue. And even in, we work within a system, big system, well connected, it's still a challenge to get that communication out to, even beyond your PI. So, I mean, yeah, that's interesting and unfortunate, obviously. But yeah, I was kind of curious, was there anything else that jumped out to you as sort of a, misconception or presumption that was otherwise different than what you expected, like part of being in a trial? I mean, again, I know, like, I feel like I talk about trials all day, but yeah, was there anything that jumped out as being like, oh, this is different, for better or worse than you maybe expected?
Interestingly, in fact, I just presented this at a conference last week. As a patient, coming into a large healthcare system, simple little things like getting from one department to the other, finding your way through a hospital, if you don't work there, it's complicated. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that this organization had that really helped me a lot was a patient concierge. And she helped me. She helped me make my appointments in the different departments. She helped me get from point A to point B. She basically taught me the ropes of how to get around in the institution. So that's an area where I think there's been some really good progress, and of course that helps with retention, right? Because you have somebody who can help you as a patient get what you need to know. So yeah, that really jumped out at me as a huge step forward. And I really, really appreciated all the help I got.
Yeah. And I think people underestimate sometimes how much you're asking of patients, and even something that's seemingly as simple as that, which is literally, go somewhere else on the campus. Well, you take for granted that every nook and cranny of the place that you work, but patients have no idea. And so we find that too, like having our coordinators walk people to imaging, whatever the case may be. Small things, right? Sometimes it's the small things, because again, you're asking them to do extra.
Exactly. It's little things. It's little things. But I really felt great about the way I was treated. They were extremely nice to me through the whole process. And yeah, so that was, again, interesting experience. I mean, I guess I'm kind of lucky in some ways. This is going to sound weird, but having worked at a sponsor, who develops the protocols, and then then working at a CRO who in many cases are implementing protocols these days on behalf of sponsors. And then of course the sites. And, you know, at ACRP, it was great because I worked very closely with study coordinators, PIs, site monitors. I used to tell people, look, these are the folks that actually are doing the clinical trial. These are the people who are with the patients, collecting the data, day to day, et cetera. And then actually having been a patient myself. So it's sort of the entire gamut, if you will, of the clinical trial ecosystem.
Are there any, I mean, and this is something that occurs to me so often, but I mean, are there any like noticeable gaps between these sort of stakeholders, right? So I feel at a site level, sometimes we never see the sponsor or don't even know anything about the sponsor for dealing with the CRO.
Yeah.
I've spoken at conferences where I've said something and a sponsor has come up and been like, oh, we didn't know that. We only talked to the CRO. So
yes,
there seems to be a big game of telephone we're oftentimes all playing and nobody's really quite on the same page. I mean, and you got at least like a nice bird's eye view of, you know, these different, you know,
Brad,
participants. Like, is that something that, is it overblown or did it jump out to you as being the case as well?
It is not overblown. And in fact, I'm glad you brought it up because it's probably one of the biggest issues we face in the industry. And here's what I mean by that. When I worked at the sponsor, you know, I thought I understood sites. I thought I understood CROs. Then I went and worked at a CRO. And yeah, there were some things I got, but there were a lot of things I didn't get. Well, the gap between CRO and sponsor and the investigator sites is it's so much larger, right? Because this is the way I like to explain it to people. Let's say a trial gets stopped halfway through for some reason. Does that affect the sponsor's revenue at that moment? No. Does it affect the CRO's revenue? Yes, because they have people on staff that are on that project. That money gets cut off. And then on top of it, they have to keep paying those people. So they have to figure out what to do with those resources. The human factor, the services, that's their revenue source, but it's also their cost source. With pharma, it's only a cost, it's not a revenue. Okay, right. So that's one big gap. When you take that to the site level, you know, that's even worse because the sites are usually smaller businesses in general, right? So that lack of revenue all of a sudden can be really devastating from a financial perspective for them. It's hard on the CROs, but the large ones in particular, but it's really hard on the sites. So that is a huge gap in terms of the business model. A site business model is so different than a CRO or a sponsor. And you're right, people don't understand. And it goes both ways, by the way. You know, sites don't understand some of the pressures that sponsors and CROs are under and vice versa. So, you know, more conversation, and I know SCRS is doing a great job with this, you know, trying to drive those conversations so that we all learn more, because it's all about communication and understanding. And then we can figure out how to work more efficiently together, you know, and not to you know, change the subject, but that's kind of what we're interested in with AMRC. I mean, it's the Association of Multi-Site Research Corporations. And the idea is, how do we develop more efficient business models with sites so that, you know, we have dedicated resources for things like technology, for data management, for patient recruitment, for contracting. How do you create an entity that is more streamlined, if you will, and more efficient, and provide higher quality, because we also have dedicated QA people, than the traditional approach. And when I say traditional, I mean, you know, the old days of the mom and pop shop where the doctor is doing clinical practice as well as clinical research. There's maybe one coordinator who's a jack of all trades. We're trying to streamline the system and make it more efficient. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I do want to dig more into that for sure. And to your, you know, previous point, I think I've been blown away the more I've had the, you know, luxury to speak to people from sponsors and CROs that, you know, we don't know at the site level as much as we like to complain at the site level, but we don't know what's going on at the,
well, don't worry. Don't worry, the
level.
CROs and the sponsors complain too.
I'm sure they do. And honestly, I mean, I wish they would do it as publicly as sites often do, because frankly, we could actually have a conversation. I mean, I think, and again, the more I learn, not that I feel better about it, but at least I start to understand why things are the way they are or the reasoning behind them. Then you can start to have a little bit of, you know, empathy. It's easier. I think it makes everything easier, even if it's not something we can fix, or even if it's still something silly,
Yeah.
at least you have that understanding. You can kind of work from from some common ground. So
Yeah.
anything that gets more of those conversations happening, the better. And I wish they would complain more loudly so we could all address it.
Well, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's all about communication and you're right, empathy and understanding. I would like to point out there is a question that just came in about how do smaller site networks benefit from AMRCs, and what I'd like to draw a parallel with is the Association of CROs, ACRO. So the guy who's the executive director of ACRO is a good friend of mine. We worked closely together when I was at ACRP. And he explained to me that when they first started ACRO, which was, 20, 25 years ago, it was several of the large CROs. Now, some consolidation even within those CROs has taken place since then, but they were the big ones at the time. And their approach was, if we can help the CRO marketplace or help pharma understand how to use us more effectively and how to partner with us more effectively, that lifts the waters for all ships, right? So as the tide rises, all ships rise. And that's exactly the way we're approaching it with AMRC. As we get these ideas out there and advocate for these efficiencies, et cetera, it's going to help our members, but it's going to help all sites that are dedicated sites, quite frankly, because that's really what we're driving towards is, we're not saying only use large networks. There are definitely areas where academia makes sense, where the smaller sites do make sense. But I think it's interesting. I saw a study recently that looked at site selection. It was just published in Applied Clinical Trials, I think in just this February. But they were talking about how dedicated sites are selected compared to the more community sites and academic sites. And interestingly, the dedicated sites put more time into feasibility and are selected less often. So they do feasibility faster, they do site preparation faster, but yet they're not selected as often. But when there's a rescue, guess who they come back to? They come back to the dedicated sites. So that shows you in today's environment, the sort of the thought process is to go with what we traditionally do, as opposed to stepping into the future and working more with these organizations where you have dedicated employees.
Sure. Yeah, I do want to get into the, I guess, implications of AMRC, so to speak. And thank you, Scott, for the question. If, again, you guys have questions, comments, please feel free anytime. Jump in there. We'll try to address everything that we can. I guess let's go backwards, though, first. Let's talk a little bit about, what is AMRC and what was sort of the ideas when you guys started founding it. I understand it is a nonprofit, from my understanding. So I guess tell me a little bit about its formation, and I'm kind of curious, like why a nonprofit, and sort of we'll dive deeper after that. But yeah, what can you tell me about its beginning, so to speak?
Well, so to be honest with you, I wasn't there at the very beginning, but what I've heard from the members is, I believe it was at an SCRS conference, they got together and started talking about some of the challenges that these organizations face, and what is it we can do to help address those challenges? What should we be advocating for, and how would we go about doing that? And again, using ACRO as the model, they looked at it and they said, well, this market is probably going to continue to consolidate more and more. You've seen it happen over the last 5 or 10 years, so it's probably not going to slow down. We're probably going to see more consolidation. So if we use the CRO world as a model, how do we structure something similar to that so that we can advocate for the things and provide services to our members that perhaps we all benefit from? And I'll give you an example of some of those services. So when the FDA recently was asking for feedback about what is a protocol deviation, we were able to put together a response from AMRC and submit that. So that represented all of our members. We're doing things where we're giving the membership updates on regulatory changes and legislative changes. Most recently, we had a webinar where we talked about some of the things happening, HHS. And we need to do another one, evidently, because of the news that just came out recently about the FDA, having to cut back on people involved in drug reviews. That really concerns me, quite frankly. So it's those kinds of things that we're providing and that the members were looking for. So they wanted to create an organization that could advocate for their business model because it's more, they want to talk about streamlined efficiency, quality. They want an organization that can reach out and understand what's going on in the marketplace as it relates to regulatory and legislative activities. And I'm sure there'll be other things that come up as we go. The reason to make it or have it be a nonprofit is we're not advocating for any individual organization. We won't. In fact, if you do that, you lose your not-for-profit status. So that's not going to happen. But we are advocating for the business model that they're all working within, and saying that this is sort of the model of the future. And that's really the reason we keep it not for profit. On top of it, we don't lobby at this point.
Yeah, I was going to ask, that was one of my next questions, if there's a plan or lobbying component to that, which I know is, ties into the nonprofit status.
Yeah, we might at some point, but right now it's more keeping track and advocating, like what's going on and can we provide feedback, or at least the voice of our membership. I mean, when I think of lobbying, I think of, providing funding for elections and stuff like that. We're not going to do that. But by the way, I should also mention this organization is funded by the members. So we're a little different from some other organizations. We're not asking pharma or CROs to provide funding at this point. We're not going to be doing any conferences or anything like that. It's really more, like I said earlier, to advocate for the concepts that we believe in, as well as, monitor what's going on in the environment and help our members, deal with that.
Yeah, I would recommend against putting on a conference. It's a huge pain in the ass.
Well, I did that at
ACRP. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure you're well aware of that at this point. I got
to tell you, it was a great experience, and I really enjoyed doing it because it was wonderful to have so many people together, like-minded, But you're right; it's a big project, a lot of work, and it's financially it can be risky
for sure.
if you don't know what you're doing.
For sure. Do you you talked a little about sort of following the ACRO model, perhaps maybe that's too strong, but taking some inspiration maybe from what ACRO has done. Do you think, and this is a question that came up prior to the show, I think, do you think that AMRCs are a threat to CROs as they are now? Do you think that if a couple of large networks can do a lot of that front end work, does that eat into some of the CRO services?
It's a good question. I've heard people say that, and maybe I'm being narrow-minded or naive, but I don't think so. And here's the reason I say that. A lot of the CRO business models are changing anyway. They're getting into new services. As you've seen, a lot of the CROs, not a lot, but some of the CROs have purchased their own site networks, right? Mm-hmm. So they're trying to vertically integrate. And when I talk to some of the organizations or the site networks that, are part of CROs, they're not only doing business with their CRO, they're also trying to do business with other CROs and other sponsors. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't think the need for site monitoring is ever going to really go away. I think that the FSP model will continue to grow, so I think, and technology solutions as well are becoming more predominant. So I think there's always going to be a role for a CRO. Will it evolve? Yeah, but so is everything else. I mean,
sure.
AMRC will evolve too,
sure,
over time.
Yeah, I mean, no implication whether it's a good or bad what the CROs are. If it eats in or changes the CRO model to some degree, I've always found it an interesting question, I guess.
Well, the other thing, Brad, that's interesting is if you look at a small biotech, say a single product biotech company, they're going to have to fully outsource their development because they're not going to hire resources to do that much work, especially in phase 2 and 3. So I think there'll always be business there for that.
That's interesting to me because I know I could see this being a potential upside of working with a multi-site research corporation, because we've worked with small biotechs where they're doing a lot in-house with, frankly, people that probably shouldn't be doing some of the things they're doing. I don't, that's
I've
not,
seen that too.
not necessarily I'm saying that completely
Yeah.
derogatory way. I know startups are what they are and people
Yeah.
wear a lot of hats, but working with instead of them trying to go find 25 sites and work with them independently, potentially being able to work with one certainly provides some efficiency, so to speak. And one of the questions I had, which is kind of dovetails with what Victoria here, in terms of AMRC being different from SCRS, which we know works a lot for sites. And if top enrolling sites don't want to consolidate, is that really the goal? Should be working to unify all sites, independent and network affiliated. My question too was sort of like, are the challenges to multi-site corporations like unique, and I guess so, in what ways versus a smaller site network?
Yeah. Well, let me address the difference between our organization and SCRS first. I actually spoke to the people at SCRS when all this started. And in fact, some of the people on our board are also on their board.
Sure.
The big difference is SCRS, as you know, their primary focus is on issues around the business relationship, meaning reimbursement, contracting, things of that nature, with sponsors and CROs. Whereas ours is more around the operational side of things. We're not, okay, we will work with SCRS and collaborate with them if we want to start working on sort of an industry-wide contract template, for example.
Sure.
And we've been working with DIA to some extent, in other organizations. But we're not the same as SCRS in that our focus is, again, going to be more on this operational efficiency, improvement of quality standards. They even talk to us a little bit about, they don't do any type of government relations stuff, so to speak.
Sure.
So they want to work with us in that arena. So there's, there definitely are pretty significant differences. Do we both represent sites? Yes, but it's sort of in a different way. It's funny because when I was at ACRP, that question came up a lot too. And at ACRP, our whole position was, look, we're not here to talk about supporting sites necessarily, not that we don't, but our focus is on the staff at sites. How do we improve the quality of staff through education, certification, et cetera? So it's, I truly believe there's a place for all these organizations because they have specific areas that the industry needs to improve upon.
Yeah, there's no shortage of things, no shortage of problems that need to be solved for sure. So, okay, and I guess to even go back at the basics at some level, like what constitutes a multi-site research corporation versus, I don't know, we use all kinds of different words now, right? There are IROs and SMOs and site networks and I guess MRCs. So I guess what's a distinguishing characteristic that I guess sets it aside from what other acronym you may want to use?
Yeah, great question. So the criteria that we're using for our membership for an MCRC, MCRC is at least 5 sites that you own. The people who are working at sites have to be your employees through the central corporation. And the reason this is important, and also it needs to be your primary business. So for example, as I was mentioning earlier, the site networks that belong to CROs, they're not eligible because the primary business is the CRO, not the sites in that model.
Sure.
But the reason this is important is we feel like that centralized control, i.e. how you staff, who the staff reports to, what their roles and responsibilities are, et cetera, that needs to be centralized. And that's sort of where we are in terms of our definition of MCRCs. There's some interesting work that's going on right now through linking leaders.
I lost your audio, Jim.
Whoops. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, I lost you. Says your mic's not connected. So sorry, guys. Excuse the technical difficulty. I think you still have to unmute as well.
Here we are. I apologize. Can you hear me now?
I'm getting nothing.
Huh.
Is anyone listening right now in the audience can pipe in if you're able to hear Jim for some reason? I'll make sure it's not my problem. Okay. Apparently they can hear you. So maybe this is something on my end. Give me a second here.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello? I'm sorry.
All right. Bear with me, guys.
Okay. So I'm getting in the chat that they can hear it. They can hear us, but I guess you can't hear me for some reason.
All right, Jim, give me a second. I don't know why I can't hear you. I'm going to exit stream and pop right back in. If it kicks you out, just jump right back in. And sorry, guys. Give me just a second.
Will do. Hey.
I can hear you great.
All right. Good.
Sorry, I must have done something on my end, but apologies. If you remember where you were, feel free to pick back up.
Actually, I don't.
I
was going to make a joke about my technological skills.
It must have been on my side. Everyone could still hear us both, apparently. So thank you guys in the comments. Of course, now everyone wants to chime in. So thank you. The distinguishing characteristics of a multi-site research corporation. So it sounds like 5 owned sites. So these are
correct
standalone locations, presumably.
Presumably. I mean, the most important thing is that the employees report in through one central group.
Yeah.
Again, and it's for that reason of, as I was saying, of standardized SOPs, standardized roles and responsibilities. It's less of a herding the cats, if you will.
No, right? Yeah, and we've seen that too. Like we employ all of our coordinators, but we have worked in situations where we've contracted with a staff member in a clinic with which we work or something like that. And it does become, I don't want to say problematic, but it can become very challenging when you don't really have that direct report. And, they oftentimes have interests beyond research, which is going to affect quality and, just the level of attention that a trial gets. So that's perfectly understandable.
Yeah. No, I will reiterate that, that doesn't mean that we think there aren't opportunities that what we're doing will help other types of sites as well. Because if we can develop best practices, through the organization and things that we can introduce to the industry, we're more than happy to do that. And by the way, we really do want to collaborate with other organizations as well as regulatory on some of these things so that we can help. Again, we were talking earlier about this whole thing about communication and understanding. We really want to drive towards that. And with a larger group of sites, by the way, we represent now about 500 sites, about 1,500 PIs, and about 8,000 employees. And if we can come up with better quality standards and SOPs and things like that we can introduce to the industry, that could really help everybody.
Yeah, so did you guys just add another member?
Yeah, actually, interesting timing. The press release went out this morning. We added a company called Pradia. And what's really nice about this is they have a very strong presence outside the United States. So we have a number of sites. We had some already, but the vast majority were US based. And now we have quite a few more outside the US.
Interesting. Okay. And so I guess, what's next? So I see you guys are starting to, put out some content, put some material together. Are there going to be sort of work groups you guys put in? I mean, I sort of seen what DTRA has done over the last several years and some of the stuff that they've done. Anything sort of near that model, or do you guys have some solid milestones that you're looking to achieve?
Well, since we're almost brand new, right? We just launched January 23rd.
Fair.
One of the probably the most common pushback we get is why do we want to work with a site network? What's the value compared to our traditional model? And we've been talking to sponsors and CROs about helping us gather data that compares the sites that are MCRCs in their studies to sites that are not MCRCs. And let's see if there's a difference in things like patient recruitment, patient retention, quality of the data, startup timelines, other factors primarily focused around speed and quality, those two areas. So the speed stuff tends to lean towards operational efficiency type of activities, timelines, things like that. Whereas the quality can be a little bit more subjective, but still there are some types of data that we can use. So that's sort of where we're at right now. And if there's any CRO or sponsor on the call that would like to collaborate with us on that, please reach out to me, because we feel like it's really important we get that information and publish it. There have been some studies done recently. In fact, the one I mentioned earlier that was in Applied Clinical Trials, the impact report talks about that one. And interestingly, getting the site initiation visit done, it's about 2 weeks faster if you're using a dedicated site. Now, these are not MCRCs necessarily. They haven't broken it down to that level, but dedicated sites are faster at getting startup than, say, academic or community sites. The other interesting data was in DIA's journal last year, and it shows that the enrollment was about double for the dedicated sites compared to the traditional average. So that kind of information, what we'd like to do is drill down a little further and say, okay, if you looked at these site networks similar to our membership, what happens then? Is it even better, or is it worse, or like what's the difference? Theoretically and hypothetically, we believe it's going to be better, and the reason is because of dedicated resources, standardized processes, dedicated personnel to different roles and responsibilities, things like that.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, that presumably does make sense, but I'm sure, I would think there would be data. Again, to your point though, these CROs may have it sort of squirreled away somewhere.
Interestingly, Brad, one of the big challenges is most sponsor and CRO CTMS systems, somebody can enter a site, say the project manager enters the site. Well, it might be Joe Smith, MD.
Right.
Next time it's J Smith, MD.
Yeah. I've seen it all kinds of ways too. Yeah.
And it makes it very, very difficult. Now there's some work going on in the industry to try to standardize down to one, what they're calling a golden number, through drug dev, but not everybody's used that so far. And so it does make it a bit challenging, quite frankly, to get at the data. Yeah,
no, I can see that. It's data is kind of a mess everywhere, so to speak. Hopefully that improves. So, let's flip it around a little bit. I mean, we know, or I guess I'll phrase it this way: are there risks or threats, to working with a large sort of consolidated group? And we saw what happened with Pfizer and Care Access. If you have a quality issue, that suddenly becomes a much bigger concern. If you're working across one big group versus independent groups, and it being a little bit more distributed, or that risk being distributed.
Yeah.
Do you think how much of a legitimate concern is that?
I think it's legitimate, but here's sort of the position that we're taking is, we're not necessarily saying go to one organization, sign a contract, and do everything through them. What we are saying is, let's say you're doing a phase 3 and you need 50 sites. Okay, so the traditional model would be, you'd go out, you'd find 50 sites, you'd assess those sites, you'd go through the feasibility, you'd do the contracting, yada yada. It takes a long time and a lot of manpower on both sides. So what if instead you could go to 3 different organizations, each with 10 sites, sign one contract with each of those, okay? And then you go pick whatever else you need. If you decide you want some academic sites, or if you want some community sites, so the other 10 or 20, whatever the number turns out to be, you do through traditional contracting. To me, that makes a lot more sense. And if you do have a quality problem, it will be limited that way.
Sure. Yeah. And again, it does make sense. we talked a little bit on this maybe more philosophical question, but I mean, it's not a, if you go look at the sites or multi-site research corporations that are part of AMRC, I mean, these are big private equity backed groups. We're seeing a lot of consolidation. Is consolidation good? Overall, I mean, we've seen what it can do in healthcare, which I guess you can have your opinion as to whether it's good or bad, but we've seen a lot of destructive things happen because of private equity. And do you think this is a generally good thing? Think it'll outweigh, or will the efficiency outweigh, any perceived risk that comes with sort of the consolidation?
Well, the short answer is I believe so. And the reason I believe that is when you look at let's go back 10 or 15 years before these things started to really develop. If you look at how we worked with sites, every site was doing their own thing.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing I learned through quality improvement initiatives at Lilly and other corporations I worked at, is that, and Six Sigma is really big on this, is variance is the enemy of quality. So when you're talking about manufacturing, for example, not that this is manufacturing, but that's where Six Sigma kind of came from originally. The more variance you had in your manufacturing process, the more likely your product was going to break down. The same is true in a service. The more variance you have, a good example of a service industry that has very little variance, it's high quality, is Starbucks. Think about when you walk into a Starbucks anywhere in the world, you know what you're going to get. It's going to be, whatever latte you like. It's consistent. We don't have that in the industry, or have not had that in the industry historically with investigator sites. So yeah, even if there's a little bit of a problem in terms of what consolidation does, it's far outweighed by the quality that we're going to get, and the more consistency we're going to get, and the more efficiency we're going to get through consolidation. Now, can it go too far? Yes, I believe it could go too far. I don't see that happening. I don't see it happening, quite frankly. I mean,
well, and look, academic sites are not going away. There's no
right.
question about that, dude. And again, small sites will probably not go either. I mean, I do agree, and I mean, I see it all the time. I talk to a lot of people who work across different types of sites, but just a complete lack of consistency, and it's frustrating. And I think it does hold the industry back to some degree. I don't know, the best answer per se. Obviously, if we can create some standard or consistency amongst ourselves, that would be ideal. That comes from something like AMRC, so be it. I don't love the name you guys picked. I wish you wouldn't have called yourself multi-site research corporations. I feel like it feels very
well,
it feels it makes it so niche and so sort of like, it seems, and maybe it's meant to be like so exclusive, to that group. But nonetheless,
probably the key word that we wanted to capture was corporation. And the reason, I know that has negative connotations. It can, but the reason we wanted to make that clear is, again, back to this idea of the employees report in through one company. And we feel like that's a really important factor in, again, driving these efficiencies and the quality standards, et cetera. At one point we were thinking MRSA, multi-site, but we thought, no, that kind of has a negative connotation.
Yeah. I mean, do we see, are there still sites operating that sort of don't employ their own staff or coordinators, or is that more of the SMO model sort of in a way? Or I guess I'm having a hard time thinking of a large organization that wouldn't. I can see smaller groups potentially doing like contracting versus W-2.
It's a good question, Brad. I don't know the answer, but I can tell you that, again, for our members, that's pretty much the way it's structured.
Yeah.
I can almost guarantee you that, yes, there are hospital institutions and others that hire temporary staff to do clinical research.
Sure.
And that's not a bad thing. I'm not suggesting it is. It's just that, to your point earlier, it's a lot easier if you're managing multiple sites. If all the people at those multiple sites report in to one organization, they have similar, again, job titles and roles, and there's SOPs in place. And the organization can staff the key functions that need to be there to support the study coordinators and the PIs. By the way, that's another thing I should have mentioned earlier is one of the things that we're anticipating, and we're gonna look into this too, hopefully soon, is that when you have a company that people know their roles and responsibilities, you're less likely to get burnout than in organizations where people are a jack of all trades and they're constantly being bombarded with all these different requests that they may or may not be capable or have the experience doing. So we believe that, we've got a problem in the industry, right? There's a lot of people dropping out. We've been losing study coordinators, we've been losing site monitors,
For sure.
PIs, the one and done phenomena. We think that this model will alleviate some of that burnout, and that we'll get people who are dedicated to research and do it for a career. And that's ultimately where you get the best quality, and
Sure.
experience always helps.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that, I mean, again, we're fairly small, but we see that it's challenging to find good experienced coordinators. I mean, it's just coordinators, but there's obviously like applies to anyone sort of at the site level across the board. So yeah, that's going to be a challenge, I think, over the next, I don't know, 5 years, decade, maybe. We'll see. Hopefully things improve. We know there's very uncertain conditions right now, to say the very least.
Yeah. Well, I know that ACRP has been focused on this for a while, is trying to grow the workforce. That being said, though, when COVID hit, it burned out people in healthcare, period, whether you were doing clinical research or clinical practice.
For sure.
So we've got a bit of a gap to make up for. But again, one of the things we're hoping to see or expect to see is that we won't have as many people burn out. We won't have as many people drop out, and you'll have highly experienced professionals doing your clinical studies. And that we all want that. Even speaking for myself as a patient, I want that, so that my doctor's got better options in the future.
Well, and I would assume this isn't always the case, and especially in clinical research, but if the model, of the MRCs tends to be better than other models, I mean, that alone is going to result in more awards, more relationships that, some of these companies have been around for a while. They're not, new to the game. So I'd imagine there's enough, or at least some level of, visibility out there that, they're going to succeed if they're truly more efficient and moving quicker. I mean, over time that will become so apparent that it won't be ignored by the industry, right? I mean, rather than picking up 50 mom and pop sites, you'll pick up, or again, probably still have some of those in there, but you'll go to your multi-site corporations more frequently.
Yeah. And I think, as the relationships build, you get standardized contracts in place, with terms and conditions. That streamlines things tremendously. People get to know one another. This is a relationship driven business, quite frankly. And as people build trust and that enhance that communication we were talking about earlier, things will move much more quickly. There'll be better understanding across the various, if you think of them, stakeholder groups, from pharma to CRO to site, and then of course patient populations. So yeah, I back to your earlier question, is this going to outweigh the potential downsides? I think dramatically outweigh it. So.
Yeah. And again, I mean, time will tell. It's not going to, I don't think any of this consolidation is going to stop, at least not for the near term. Well, maybe in the very, very near term, but hopefully not beyond that.
Yeah. With the economy.
Yeah. Things are a little, And again, with the news today about, how that could affect or impact the industry, that'll be interesting.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the comment about pharmaceuticals, I don't know what that meant exactly. I'm not sure if they're referring to generics, to marketed products, to development. I will find out, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone does at this juncture, so we'll see.
Well, hopefully we'll do a webinar pretty soon with our political guy, our government relations guy, who can explain what the heck's going on.
There you go. Yeah, it's got a couple minutes left. Any questions you got, get them in. And we'll just kind of start winding down here. Anything else that you want sort of, people to know, maybe about AMRC, or, misconceptions you want to deal with, or again, just anything in general you want to kind of close out with.
Yeah. One comment we've heard a couple times has been, how do we know that these private equity firms, when they come in, they're not going to be focused on profits and not patients? And our response to that is that would be so counterproductive. Sure, do they want to turn a profit? Sure, but the bottom line is you're not going to unless you have a good product. So, and when I say product, I mean delivering good quality data. And in order to do that, you have to treat your patients right. So we're not. That to me seems like an odd supposition that just because these are for-profit organizations buying these sites that's going to lead to poor quality. If anything, it's going to lead to better quality.
Yeah, and I think it's not hard to like follow the train of thought. I mean, look at what's happened with like rural hospitals who get bought by private equity. A lot of them get shut down, because they're able to borrow against that debt. It turns into this whole cycle. The at least prevailing thought is that PE is looking to squeeze for 3 to 5 years every dollar they can, so they can get a really good investment or a good return back on that. And again, I'm not very smart about a lot of this stuff, so I could be speaking out of turn, but I think that's oftentimes the perception of private equity, right?
And it's fair to say that, but at the end of the day, they're going to want to turn over let's assume that they're going to want to sell the organization at some point, right? They come in, they fund it, they sell it. They have to have a good product.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was working at one of the CROs, we were looking at acquisitions of actually patient recruitment suppliers. And, we looked at the quality of their product. And if we didn't think it was adequate, particularly based on the price that they had in mind, then we said no. So you want a good product. That's at the end of the day. You want to have a really good clientele, and you're not going to have a good clientele if you cut corners, right? You want to have a good pipeline. I mean, CROs are all about their pipeline. That's what's going to happen with MCRCs too. You're going to be looking at their pipeline. And as they build strong strategic relations with big pharma and with CROs, trust me, their value is going to go up. And that's not going to happen unless they deliver. So it's that simple, in my mind.
Sure. Yeah. And again, time will tell. I don't know either way myself. I tend to be a little cynical at times, even though I consider myself generally optimistic. So we'll see. I imagine that's a question you're probably going to continue to get, whether it's warranted or not.
Yeah, I think we will. But again, it's interesting. When I first started talking about patient recruitment 25 years ago, we got all this pushback. You can't talk to patients. You can't communicate. Well, actually, yes, you can if you do it appropriately.
Right.
So sometimes the objections that we get in the industry, I think, are, they're somewhat warranted, but they tend to be exaggerated beyond, what the potential upside is. And the risk is not as big as people perceive. I used to tell people back in the day when we were trying to get this patient centricity thing going, oh, it's too risky. And I'd say, well, tell me something that isn't risky. I mean, walking across the street is risky. So what do? You mitigate the risk. You look both ways, then you cross the street. I mean, and so the risks, again, I don't think could it happen? Yes. Will there probably be a bad actor somewhere along the line?
Yeah. Likely there will be, but again, generally we hope that's not the case, but
that's right. Every industry has, their rogue,
of course,
but in generally speaking, I really don't see it as a problem. In fact, I see it the opposite. I think we're going to see improved quality, improved patient relationships, improved speed, all these things.
Well, I, for one, look forward to finding out.
Me too.
Jim, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and hang on the line for a couple seconds. I'm going to play my new little outro here. And again, thanks, guys, for listening. Thanks for your comments and questions. Jim, thanks again, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.